Welcome to the Digital Marketing Mentor. I'm your host, Danny Gavin, and together with industry leaders and marketing experts, we'll explore the meeting point of mentorship and marketing. We'll discover how these connections have affected careers, marketing strategies, and lives. Now get ready to get human. Hello, everyone. I'm Danny Gavin, founder of Optage, marketing professor, and host of the Digital Marketing Mentor. Today, I'm so excited to have a very special guest, Glenn Taylor of Skybound Coaching and Training, who is the president and a certified leadership coach. I've known Glenn for over 10 years, and it's so awesome to have him here. Skybound Coaching and Training, what is their coaching sweet spots? Well, they nerd out on helping strengthen leadership presence, confidence, authenticity, influence, emotional intelligence, presentation and speaking skills, creative problem solving, innovation, and collaboration. Some accolades and certifications that Glenn has gotten throughout the years: professional certified coach through the International Coaching Federation, a CPCC coach through the Coactive Training Institute. He's a past president of his local ICF chapter, and he also teaches coaching skills and mentors coaching in training. Last but not least, he has an amazing podcast, which we'll talk about later in the episode. Glenn, so nice to have you.
Thanks so much for having me, Danny. This is really cool.
My pleasure. All right, let's dive right in. Let's start off with just your education, the early ways of how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a winding road. Like a lot of people, I've actually always been interested in creative sort of things. So as a kid, I was into art and magic. I was a magician in second grade called the Great Glenn. So that name still follows me today, which I embrace. But I was just always into creative pursuits. So ended up studying music actually in college. Ended up shifting to a music business degree to get a little bit of that business background. And then worked in the music industry for about a decade in marketing. And that's where I really got my background in marketing. And also my first taste of leadership when I was promoted to a leadership position to manage a team. That's when I started to get really interested in people development. So from there, just started to uncover a deeper interest in leadership, and ended up going back for got a master's in organization development and leadership.
Let's go a little bit more into undergrad and your bachelor in music. I mean, obviously, you're far away from there today, but do you look back at that time and see any specific moments or classes or professors that really made a difference to you now?
Yeah, I had an amazing piano teacher at the time. So anybody studying music gets a private teacher that they work with one-on-one. And I would say, now that you're bringing that person to mind, he was definitely a mentor type, but also a teacher. What I really appreciated about him was that he was able to break down jazz music into a process. A lot of jazz musicians who are teachers, they just sort of say do it like this, and then they play. Like make it sound like this, or they just don't know how to actually break it down into how do you, nuts and bolts of how do you get better at something. So he had really figured that out and had a very organized way, I guess, to think about how you get better at playing jazz, which a lot of people think how does that work? Because it's so much improvisation and fluidity, but it really is very mathematical, and there's a lot of preparation that has to go into it. Even though it's an art, he still has made an impact, I think, on me in terms of how I get better at things, because he modeled that very process-oriented approach.
I mean, I can relate to it with guitar when you're doing a solo or riffing, right? So it's like learning all those scales, getting the idea, and then eventually they can let you loose and do what you need to. But to learn those fundamentals, even when like you said, like jazz, seemingly it's not fundamentals, it's all improv. But to learn those basics, and having someone who's so much higher and more knowledgeable than you, usually those people, they can't distill, right, their knowledge in a way down to that person. But it sounds like that teacher really could.
Yeah, Michael Polera is his name, and he's still around. And because I went to college in New Orleans, so he's still performing around there and teaching at some other schools. So really gifted teacher.
One point I want to bring up, or one question is, so you were, I'm sure we're going to talk about some of the influences while you were at the symphony and you were CMO at the symphony. But before we jump in there to let everyone know, right? You had a successful career at the symphony. You were the CMO. You did really amazing. And then at that point, you decided, I want to leave corporate world and I actually want to become a coach. For some people that could have been, and I'm sure there were people in your lives like, oh my gosh, Glenn, you're throwing it all away. That's crazy. But for you, like you knew inside you was the right thing. And as we can see, like these many years later, how successful you are. But how about we go through that just a little bit, that process of how did that come up? How did you get the gumption that, throw away the fear and actually make a change like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty messy process. I think maybe like many people, I don't know, we all envision this more perfect, I'm going to be at this place with the side hustle where it's making this much money and it looks like this, and then I'll be ready to go for it. But it rarely happens that way. I can't take all the credit for stepping off the cliff because I'll admit that I actually was exited out of the symphony. So I was asked to leave. I was laid off at a certain point, which initially at that phase in my career wasn't telling that story. The message was Glenn has decided to leave the symphony and that sort of thing. But I want to be honest about it because I think, I'm all about keeping it real. And that was part of the impetus, although not all of it. I had definitely done some things ahead of time that helped me take advantage of that opportunity because there was certainly, when I was asked to leave the symphony, which really was a good thing, there was definitely that voice saying, well, why don't you just go into another marketing position at another major symphony, or even like a sexier marketing position. Like you could probably, be in the running for the New York Philharmonic's marketing director, or, these other major orchestras. So I could have kept climbing that career ladder, if you will, and that would have been a more safe, more expected path. But I think I had done the soul searching in the couple of years before that happened and laying some groundwork that enabled me to feel like, no, I can put on that red cape, which has been such a powerful image for me, and make the jump. So, I mean, I had done the soul searching around my own core values, life purpose, and I was lucky enough to participate in a leadership program that asked us to do those things, that put us through a lot of those exercises that I now do with clients. I mean, they're very coach-like activities where you define what are the top values that are most important to you that you want to make choices based on. What is your life purpose or your personal mission, which can sound really intimidating to think about, but so important to reflect on. So I had done those things and really uncovered this calling, passion around people development, coaching. And then I had started laying the groundwork with working with a branding design company to think about, well, what would a coaching company brand look like? Thinking about some names, starting to build that brand, starting to build a website presence, doing some speaking, doing some side coaching and things, building up my coaching hours. So I'd been doing all these things. So at that point, when I found myself in that opportunity to make a decision, it was very clear because I think I'd already put some energy towards this and really built the resonance in me for this new path. But it was difficult. I think the reason I hadn't stepped out on my own previous to that was because of maybe what you mentioned. There were people in my life that made that more complicated, which I think is often the case when people are in relationships, have family, that sort of thing, right? It's a bigger decision than just a personal decision. So that made it more difficult to step out earlier. But so sometimes I think that's the best thing about the universe or God making things happen for you and kind of forcing you to make certain decisions.
Yeah, it's such an perfect example of, maybe at the time looking at something and seeing, oh my gosh, it's really horrible. But when you look back at it, later, it's like, oh my gosh, it was all meant to be.
Mm-hmm.
And it provided me with the path to where I am today. So the trick is, how do we realize at the moment that, even though it seems really bad, but there's something good out of it. So that's something that we all have to work on. But it's nice to have things to look back at to be, I've been in a situation like that before. And, I'm going to do my best to try to see the positive from it.
Mm-hmm.
But that's amazing. And I love how you were doing the things necessary to build it up. And then before you knew it, you look behind you, like, oh, actually, I'm a coach already. I already have a coaching practice. So let me just make it official, which is so cool. Thanks for being open about that, because I never knew that. And it definitely, enhances the story, I think, because just because you left the symphony for whatever reason doesn't really make a difference. But there was a fork in the road, and you could have taken either path, and you made a decision, I think, to take the one which was less traveled, and long term, it appears that it was a really good choice.
It was, but because I will say that I didn't have client work at that time. Really, I may have had one or two like individual clients that I was doing some sample coaching with, but it's not like I had built up a replacement income. So I really did have to walk in faith, and I want to emphasize that point, that has been really fruitful for me. And faith has different implications. I mean, I'm a person of faith religiously, so that it has that element. But I think even if you're not, just faith in a general sense, that when you move towards something that feels aligned with your gifts, talents, passions, values, all of that stuff, I think that God or the universe answers. And it's kind of that thing where it has to be a collaboration, right? Like you have to step out first and indicate, like, I'm going to follow this, and I don't exactly know what's next or if it's going to work. And usually other people and God answers, and then opportunities happen. So it's certainly been that dance where if I keep moving towards this work, and taking these risks, then things happen. If I pull back and kind of stay in the comfort zone, then things don't happen as much. So it is this really interesting thing. But I think there's a lot of power. Sounds easier said than done. But if you can walk forward into that unknown towards something of purpose, then things tend to happen, and it's a really cool feeling.
You mentioned you're a swing dancer, but it sounds like you're a tango dancer as well. So very, very talented dancer, Glenn.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. And dance is a really great metaphor for a lot of things in business too.
All right. Let's jump now into mentorship. So
Great.
How do you define a mentor?
I've thought about this a lot because we talk about it in coaching quite a bit, because we have to make that distinction between, well, what is a coach versus a mentor versus a consultant? These terms get muddled for people, I think. Given that, I have some pretty clear definitions, I guess, of those different things. A coach, in terms of how we define it, a coach is somebody who doesn't give you the answers, but supports you to find your own answers. So they are a guide, a catalyst, play more of that facilitator role, ask you questions. So they draw out of you answers, resources, the potential that you already have. Whereas I think a mentor usually is more telling based. Like they're farther along in their career or in their life, and they're sharing some insights, inspiration, telling you their story, maybe giving you some pointers. So I do think mentor is more advice oriented or more telling oriented typically. Whereas a coach is more like, well, let me help you solve your problem. I don't have the answers. You have the answers. Let me help you uncover them. And I think both are really great and helpful and necessary. So not saying that coaching is better than mentorship. It's just different. I've benefited from both in my life for sure.
I love that distinction.
How does that fit with how you think of mentorship?
It's a different spin, right? It's one of the great parts about this podcast is everyone has a little bit of a different definition, and sometimes it's about explaining what it is, and sometimes it's comparing it with something else. And I think you've given us such a nice different perspective comparing it to a coach, and how both are really awesome, but provide, a little bit of a different path to where you want to get to.
And I think in reality, there's probably blurred lines between them. Like I'm sure I can think of certain mentors that even if they don't know they're stepping into coaching, have some moments of coaching, right? Where they're asking me really thoughtful, open questions that help me think through something. So that in that moment, they're kind of wearing a coaching hat. But most of what they're doing is more mentorship, or vice versa. Sometimes coaches will put on a mentor hat occasionally. So it is fluid in that way as well.
I love how you put it as hats, right? Because exactly, like it's not necessarily a person, but it's, I guess, a way of approaching something.
Yeah,
and
it's a method.
It's a method. Well, let's talk a little bit about the impactful mentors over your career and during your life.
This was fun because I hadn't really thought about this before. So I really had to go back, in my files, in my memories to try to figure out, well, who would I identify as mentors? So yeah, a few that I thought of when I was still CMO at the Symphony and starting to explore this leadership and coaching path. I signed up, like my very first leadership course was at Rice University. And at the time they had a entity on campus called Leadership Rice, where they offered some classes and programs for the students, as well as some things for the community. So I signed up for this community leaders class, and it was really like a leadership 101. And the woman who taught it, her name is Susan Lieberman, and she's now moved on from Rice and is writing some really cool books and doing some mentorship and coaching herself. But yeah, Susan was really the first person that helped me understand leadership at that more academic, deeper level, and think about what does it mean? What does it mean to be a good leader? So she was a teacher. She was in that teaching mode. But we also built a relationship outside of the class where she helped give me some thoughts and support in terms of things happening at the Symphony. She actually came into I had her come to one of my team meetings at the Symphony one time and present some ideas on leadership and effective teams. So we would meet for lunch, we would meet for coffee every once in a while after the class finished, just maintaining that relationship where, I saw her as this coach and leadership expert farther along in her path. And she was really a great support for me and also helping me, I think, see this alternate path of coaching outside of doing marketing.
Yeah, because like when you think about it at that time, right, you were in the Symphony and you weren't necessarily looking at leadership from the perspective of, ooh, this can be, my passion or my life. But it was cool, right? If you really look at it, it's like that initial grumblings of, ooh, this is something I want to do.
For sure. Yeah, she definitely fed that interest or kind of helped me uncover that even more. And then the other person, I guess chronologically, this other mentor I wanted to mention popped up in my life before Susan did. And that's Matthew Van Biesen. He eventually became the executive director, the CEO of the Symphony. Before that, he was the general manager. So when I first started working in marketing at the Symphony in 2004, he was the general manager. And then he eventually became the CEO. He definitely was a mentor for me. We had a pretty quick, I think, rapport connection and built that relationship. He was very supportive, even though as the general manager, he was in a different department. He was in the operations side of the organization. I was in marketing. He still, took interest in what I was doing, was very supportive of my ideas and my recommendations. Again, we would meet outside of kind of the day-to-day work. Like, I think I probably invited him to lunch or to coffee and wanted to build that relationship. And he shared a lot about the symphony world and his path and what it means to be a leader in a music nonprofit like that. So the biggest fruit that had really, I would say, is when he was promoted to CEO, he was the one who promoted me to be marketing director. And at that time, I was pretty young, still was in my late 20s. To have somebody trust in you that much and believe in you and give you that kind of opportunity. Like, I don't know if I had applied well, I know this for sure. If I had applied for a marketing director role at any organization at that time, I probably wouldn't have gotten it because I didn't have enough experience. But he was somebody that believed in me and said, let me give this kid this opportunity. Hey, Glenn, you're going to be the marketing director. Step up. You can do this. I believe in you. So that was a huge vote of confidence. And then knowing that he was then my boss and a mentor was a cool combination. So that was a pretty big deal that he gave me that chance.
Did it come as a surprise, or did you know it was coming when you found out he wanted you to become marketing director?
I hoped it was going to happen, right? Yeah, I mean, I think I was the natural internal choice, but with some of those higher level positions, oftentimes there'll be a search. The board or the executive director will decide, let's do a national search for this. That was actually thinking about it now. That was a really cool thing about the whole thing. I think he really said to the board, hey, we've got a great internal candidate. We're just going to move with him and let's not even do a search. So I'm guessing he really had to step up and say that. And then because he already had such great credibility in the organization, people gave him the latitude to make some of those decisions. So yeah, I think I was expected as the internal candidate, but you never know. And oftentimes, as I said, they'll bring in somebody, who appears big and sexy from some other city or whatever. Yeah, it was pretty neat. It's like, hey, this 27-year-old or 28-year-old, you're going to lead one of the top orchestra marketing teams. That was awesome. Felt good.
It's funny because I went through a similar situation in my business recently where we have an open position, and it was like, do we hire someone from the outside or do we promote from within? But, typically if I was going to hire that person from within, I never would. And there were like similar situation where it's like certain people in the organization are like, no way, you can't, promote that individual. I went within, looked at my heart, and was like, you know what? This whole organization is about like finding opportunity, helping people grow. And, we got to give people the chance. So I can definitely relate to that. And yeah, it's not easy, right? It's not an easy decision, but if you provide that support for that individual and right? Sometimes it's right. And you just got to push forward, even if others don't necessarily agree.
Yeah. Yeah. Some of those decisions are, I guess, a combination of gut and experience. So, but I think mentors do that, right? They take a risk on people in a way. They advocate for somebody who's younger, who other people might not see as maybe ready for something. And the mentor says like, no, this person, let's give them a chance. I believe in them. And that means a lot. That automatically gives you the credibility to do something, to step into something. So we can see that theme, I think, in a lot of movies and a lot of stories, where somebody's teacher or mentor advocates for them. That's really the initial chance that they get to shine. So I hadn't thought about that till now, but that's an important role of a mentor.
So once you got in the role, did he kind of let you fly, or were there still those opportunities of like mentoring you and, checking up on you and giving you advice?
There were still those opportunities for sure. I mean, we were working together very closely, meeting regularly in one-on-ones, more from business, managing the business perspective. But there were definitely moments woven in of continual mentorship, guidance. We still would do some things outside of work as well every once in a while. And I think that that's also an important piece of a mentorship relationship, is that there's it's not just a professional relationship, it becomes a personal relationship as well. And so typically there's that more social aspect, I guess, or relationship building piece that happens outside of just a mentorship conversation. So that builds trust and connection with the mentor.
Let's move to some more recent mentors. I know you've mentioned to me people like Pat Flynn, Chris Kenny. How have they mentored you?
Let me start with Pat Flynn. I was thinking about this because I'm like, can I have a mentor that I don't personally know? And I was even letting my thoughts go out on that and thinking, well, what about people that I view as heroes or inspiration who are more public figures or pop culture icons? I would even consider some of them mentors. But Pat Flynn kind of sits in between that because he's not a celebrity per se. We never actually met or talked or anything. And this was after I left the symphony and was building my business. I found Pat online through his company, Smart Passive Income. And he is like a master content creator and digital content guy, built his own business as an entrepreneur, as a coach, more as a business coach and mentor, and created a ton of content through his company that was just really inspirational for me. I mean, he was doing videos and ebooks and podcasts and all of that before a ton of people, before as many people were doing those things now. He was doing them in the late 2000s after he got laid off from a job at, I believe, an engineering company, and then decided to follow his passion to build an online business and help other people do it. So he's just been really inspirational in my journey, especially within the digital marketing and content development space. There would be a lot of days where I would listen to one of his podcasts or watch one of his videos, and it would really inspire me to keep going and to do something new and to try something new. So in that way, I think I view him as a mentor because of his teaching, because of the resources he provided and the inspiration. I think that he is to a lot of people, a lot of entrepreneurs. I'm curious, had you heard about him before? Have you ever seen his stuff?
I have not,
Okay.
but I think you've told me about him before, and
Yeah.
I know he's been a big imprint on what you do and inspiration as well.
Cool. Yeah. Right. And then Chris Kenny is somebody that I hired. So a different type of relationship. He is a mentor slash consultant, I would say, slash coach. So he kind of blends a lot of those different ways of being, but he calls himself a sales mentor. And so I hired him specifically to help me strengthen my ability to land larger contracts and to sell myself as a coach. That's kind of interesting. I mean, it's a paid relationship. So I guess at the bottom of it is a consultant type relationship. But I would say he definitely showed up more like a mentor and a coach because, again, there was a personal relationship. And even though on the surface we were working on how do I become a better salesperson, it actually got into a lot of deeper things that he helped me with that were more personal, like some confidence considerations or issues, challenges around, how do you show up confidently and vulnerably. We got into some things about like everybody has, I think, some money baggage. Like if you're going to pitch a bigger contract, how do you get your mindset right so that you feel comfortable being able to pitch higher pricing for your services and to do that with confidence? And how do you approach people in a sales conversation in a way that feels authentic to you and doesn't feel slimy and all that? He's a master of all that and was an amazing mentor that helped me really step up my revenue earnings, my business, take things to a whole nother level and show up with even better skills. So definitely an impactful person in my life, both in the professional sense and also in terms of some personal development.
You have a amazing arsenal of mentors that have helped you in your life. So now let's talk about how you mentor others. So obviously you're a coach, but let's talk about the mentor side. I know you mentor younger coaches and entrepreneurs. Let's talk about that a bit.
Yeah, I love connecting with other coaches, other entrepreneurs from my networking perspective, from a partnership standpoint, and just building relationships. And oftentimes that does present opportunities to support people who are earlier in the journey as an entrepreneur, especially as a coach entrepreneur. So as I've been involved with the Coaching Federation, which is the coaching association, and there's a local Houston chapter, that has also put me in front of or given me the chance to build relationships with other coaches. And there's a lot of people going into coaching. It's, I think, an attractive field and really, really growing. So I've had the chance to sit down with younger coaches, people just getting into it, and not only talk about coaching and my approaches, but also the business building side. Because I think that that's often the hardest thing for newer coaches is figuring out, how do I make this work as a business, especially if they don't have a marketing background. So, sharing ideas, telling part of my story, sharing some recommendations, all those I think are mentor-like. And so I enjoy giving back in that way. I also do more formal mentoring. There's actually mentoring that happens within the coach training journey. So when people are learning to become a coach and they're trying to get certified as a coach, they have to work with a mentor for a certain number of hours. And that mentorship is directly related to their coaching skills. So they have to learn a certain set of coaching skills and demonstrate those. And so as a coach mentor, I meet with people, I actually listen to their recordings, their sample recordings when they are coaching their clients. And we'll talk about what are they doing well, what could they keep leveling up about their coaching skills. So in that context, it's feedback, it's advice, and a little bit of coaching thrown in there to kind of help them figure out for themselves how to be a better coach. But yeah, that brings up the point of feedback. I think that's an important role of a mentor as well, to provide that outside perspective, because that can be so valuable. We all have blind spots that we can't see ourselves.
When you're giving feedback or even receiving it, sometimes people don't like constructive criticism or feedback. So how do you deal with it, and how do you help others deal with that?
It's a great question, because you're right. It's all of us to some degree, I think, are uncomfortable with critical feedback, at least at first. I've gotten to the point where I'd like to think, that I've worked enough on my mindset to be able to really welcome feedback. And I bring up mindset because I think it all does come to that. If you've got more of that growth mindset that sees feedback as helpful information and helpful for your growth, then you can welcome it more. Because like I said, we all have blind spots that we don't see. So that's been part of the work for me is developing that mindset that welcomes feedback. If I get defensive about feedback, then there's something for me to look at. There's something there for me to understand about myself. Like, why am I getting defensive? What's the insecurity there, or what's causing that? And so that's what I would recommend for people to kind of think about, is like, how do you view critical feedback currently, and where's that coming from? What's under the surface? I think sometimes it can help, at least in the coaching context, to first have people take an assessment of some sort that's people view as more objective, right? Like a survey, either a personality assessment or a skills-based assessment. And that can tell them things that is more data-based. It's not somebody's opinion. And then they can see like, oh, this assessment is telling me I have some gaps. So there's some things I might want to look at. I need to figure out how to work on that. So to figure out how to work on that, I probably need some feedback to understand more about that, or more, whether people see that or not. So that can be a way into it, is try to find like a data-based approach for someone to see something, learn about themselves, and then fold feedback in as part of the process. But I think, a lot of my client companies, I encourage them to try to create a feedback culture, which is to really normalize feedback and say, hey, it's one of our values. It's something about our culture. It's not just something that's going to happen once a year. So we're going to give feedback all the time. And it's a positive appreciative feedback, positive feedback, and developmental feedback. And that's a term that I think it's a more friendly term for critical feedback, is developmental feedback, because we all need to develop. We got to keep developing, or improvement-based feedback. I think some of these things around mindset, normalizing it, using other tools as well, changing the language to try to dump the baggage that we have around feedback, can help it be hopefully more of a friendly or welcome thing for people.
I love that. Super valuable. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, let's jump into marketing a little bit. You've run your own leadership coaching firm for about 8 years now. How has your marketing strategy evolved over the years?
I knew from the beginning that I wanted to focus on the digital marketing side of things, and that could be an edge for me, because as I think I mentioned before, a lot of coach entrepreneurs don't have that marketing background. So if I could really leverage the marketing and branding and also creative side, that could be a differentiator. So I don't know it's evolved in terms of probably building on itself over time, getting a little bit more sophisticated and just expanding. But from the start, I definitely knew that I wanted that to be a big part of my strategy. And thank you, Danny, for being a great mentor. Hey, I should have mentioned you. You've been a mentor for me, especially on the digital marketing side of things, to give me some thoughts, feedback, wisdom, point me in the right direction. So I've really appreciated that, Danny. But yeah, starting with investing more than probably a typical starter entrepreneur would on a website, on a brand, in terms of the visual design, and then really playing the long game of building content. So blog content, podcast, videos, and doing those things now over time, which has really paid off, building reviews, building the Google business profile, and all of that giving me a certain level of authority, credibility, and presence that I think is unique. So that's definitely been a huge part of my strategy. A lot of other marketing, I guess, if you will, for coaches actually is more old school too. So it's kind of been a combination of new school and old school. And by old school, I mean person-to-person relationship building, speaking. Speaking is a big driver of sales for coaches and consultants, because it puts you in front of people that get a taste of your presence and your expertise and all of that. Referrals, encouraging referrals. Man, those have been the biggest levers. I mean, for the last year or two, like working with Chris Kenny that I mentioned, really upping my ability to sell bigger packages, have those kind of conversations, price things at a different level has been a big part. That's definitely evolved for sure. And I'd like to do more direct business development outreach. So that's a new phase, I guess, that I'm in at this point, is figuring out what does that look like in a way that feels authentic to me. And part of my brand is doing things, being true to my values of authenticity, playfulness, creativity, trying to always bring that. So how do I, infuse that into the marketing? And that's been part of the formula as well.
I want to just touch on a couple of those points because number one, like as you were talking about the organic content, I mean, if you think about it, most people, when they're at the beginning of their journey, people always ask me, should I start with SEO or should I start with Google Ads, right? Should I go organic or paid? Glenn, you really like double down on organic content. Like I'm going to write blog posts. I'm going to create a podcast. I know that like right now it might not turn into anything, but I'm going to do it because I know it's right. And I know that it's going to help eventually. And like you look back and you suddenly look like 8 years later and like, like you go to Glenn's website. It's the most beautiful website, number one. And we'll give you the address in a couple minutes, but also like this is the library of content. And so it's not just, from what you see from the website, but there's also proof behind it. Like, wow, there's a lot of knowledge and expertise and it's amazing. So I think it's so cool that you had that gumption and the early days of like, I'm going to commit to organic content and we can see how that helped later on. I mean, like you and I, we've spoken about like just some of the terms that you rank number one for on Google. Like it's pretty crazy. Like, so it's amazing that you put in that effort.
Well, I wanted to say it's a bonus that I enjoy doing it. So I think the creative side of me and tapping into that, feeding that, like I enjoy writing. I really like graphic design. So leaning into those, I guess those talents and interests, and the fact that I see it as a creative outlet. It's not just like a thing on my to-do list. It's like, it's fun to craft a message or content that's useful for people, but that's also fun to make. So I think that keeping that mindset with it has been really good, right? Because anytime it becomes the thing I have to do, then it's not going to be as fun and it's going to be harder to do it.
That brings up an important point of like leaning into what you enjoy, right? So if you aren't going to enjoy it, I mean, sometimes you have to do things to market yourself, even if you don't love it. But if you can choose those things that are naturally going to be like, when you wake up in the morning, I want to do it. Like it's going to help a tremendous amount. I think one thing that you didn't mention, and at least from what I've seen from a third party perspective, is also your willingness to try things out, like with groups, and maybe give away a little bit where typically you would charge, but you give away something for free for people to experience. And from my perspective, I think that's been a really amazing way of how you've been able to sell and also get people to experience you. And I think a lot of people could learn from that, because sometimes it's like, I'm worth $500 an hour, and if I give away 30 minutes and and I don't get paid $250, I'm never going to do it. But it seems like you've been generous, obviously with a goal in mind, but that's helped as well.
Yeah, that I hadn't thought about that. What are the sort of things that come to mind that I've done? Are you thinking like different group conversations that I've facilitated where I invite different leaders? Or I mean, that's something that I've tried that I'd like to get back onto, is facilitating group conversations where I'm providing a little bit of content, helping people connect, inviting people to bring other people to those things. So again, it's a little bit more old school, person to person. It's kind of a mix of content and sales, because you're sort of like speaking as, I guess, you're giving some information, but then you're also meeting people face to face and building that relationship.
It's a casual way of selling, because then people get to meet Glenn. Oh, wow. Look what he's accomplished. Look at the people he knows. Look at the people he's touched. Wow, he also has some really great things to say. Maybe I should sign up for a coaching session. I think it's really smart. Obviously, it takes time and effort, and it's a little bit harder. But I like, just not that I know tons of people, but I haven't really seen that from my circles, and I think that is a competitive advantage that you bring, at least what I've seen throughout the years. So Glenn, as we've spoken about, creates really cool content. You should check out his videos. He usually ties in movie themes or comic book themes. Really, really fun. So we're going to talk about, what are your top 3 movies?
I love this question because I'm such a movie buff and nerd, and it's really hard to pick favorites. So this is a challenging question, but I'll take it on. I'll just say that these are some of my favorites. I don't know if I could even call them, top 3. So I'm kind of letting myself off the hook here.
We won't count it against you. Don't worry.
Oh man, I have to say the Back to the Future trilogy is one of my all-time favorites. And specifically the first one, the first Back to the Future movie, just, I don't know, man, something about the combination of, the 80s nostalgia and the story and the futuristic element and the DeLorean. And Michael J. Fox is one of my favorite actors. I just think he really embodied that character. And then Doc Brown and their whole relationship. Talk about mentor-mentee. Maybe there was something, some mentorship happening there. But yeah, it's just funny. It's fantastical, but it's kind of like real enough to draw you in. Like, as a kid, imagine this, like, what if this actually happened? So I really like movies that are realistic enough to where the fantasy feels grounded. That's a big one. From like a heroic, epic standpoint of a movie, I really love Gladiator with Russell Crowe. Is it Russell Crowe?
It's Russell Crowe.
Yeah, I'm like, am I saying the right name now? Yeah, so Gladiator, really love Gladiator. It's just epic movie in terms of the battle scenes, and I think they did a really great job recreating that world in the Roman Empire, and the whole transformation of the main character's journey, having been like this, Maximus is his name, being this big war general who then ends up becoming an enemy of the emperor, of Caesar, and he becomes a slave, and then he has to work his way back up. And anyway, it's there's a cool journey there of the character, and it's just awesome movie. Especially, I think it resonates for dudes. So check it out. And let me see what else. I think the original, and this is very timely because the sequel just came out, but Avatar, the James Cameron movie, the first one is one of my favorite movies ever. I enjoyed the sequel. I think all sequels are challenged because the surprise elements and stuff aren't really there anymore. So you have to, I don't know. The second one was a little bit less all there for me in terms of the writing and the characters, but the first one just awesome. I mean, I remember going to the theater and seeing it, 4 or 5 times probably in the theater when it first came out. Just the world building that was created there, but ultimately a powerful story again of transformation. Like this Marine who was really at wit's end in his life, and then finds purpose and becomes alive again, and has this whole journey of connecting with the locals that he ends up becoming a part of by the end of the movie. So, and the technology element, I think I enjoy movies with technology, world building, transformational stories. So yeah, those are a few of my favorites.
Love that. 3 movies, 3 heroes, and Glenn helps you become a hero.
Hey, look at that. Love it.
So where can listeners learn more about you and your business?
Sure. Yeah. So company is Skybound Coaching and Training, and you can find us online at goskybound.com is the website. And that's also our handle on social. So Go Skybound on all the main social outlets. And then if you're into podcasts, search for the Skybound Leadership Podcast. And we try to tie in, as you mentioned, some fun angles to leadership from pop culture, movies, music, nerd culture. So specifically, we enjoy working with clients in creative fields, in marketing and tech. So if you're in those realms, I think you'll enjoy our content. And then you mentioned the videos as well. So on YouTube, Skybound Coaching and Training.
Wonderful. Glenn, thank you so much for being a guest on the Digital Marketing Mentor. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in to the Digital Marketing Mentor. We will see you next time.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Digital Marketing Mentor podcast. Be sure to check us out online at thedmmentor.com and at the DM Mentor on Instagram. And don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts for more marketing mentor magic. See you next time.